I want to return for just a few minutes to Francis's, some of the issues he was picking up, because I think he's quite right about the major challenge we're facing with interrelated issues of globalization. The global economy that's increasing inequality, that is causing devastating climate change, and forcing into immigration people from both of those because of both the poverty and climate refugees. So these are not separate. They're different manifestations of a global economy that interrupts local economies, destroys ecologies, and forces people from their communities. I think it's worth noting that these are happening on an unprecedented scale. We've always had poverty. We've often had migration, immigrants, but we've certainly occasionally caused ecological disasters, but we've never had anything, I think, on the level we're currently experiencing with a global economy and with the capacity to do permanent climate change. So in some ways, these unprecedented challenges don't easily find direction from the Christian past. But yes, of course, we've got lots about caring for the poor, but we've never had to encounter it on the kind of global scale with a global economy. And I want to suggest that these challenges go to the heart of the mission of the church to witness to unity, because these are things that divide us, but they could unite us. A global economy could bring us together in sharing for the good of all, or it can be run for the wealth and profits of a few. We can welcome and reorient our communities, achieving, as Francis has asked us, new syntheses out as new people come in, rather than clinging to our current identities. But we are risking greater division and more people left out. And clearly, if we don't cooperate together as a world, we will not stop climate change. A key aspect of all of this that's often neglected is how women are particularly impacted, right? That poverty is experienced often differently by women than by men. We have, first of all, the majority of the poor, both internationally and nationally, are women and children. And the situation is different in terms of the relocation to search for a job, the types of jobs available, and the pressures if you're caring for children or elderly, as women often are, where that is often unaffordable. So I think those are a special constellation of causes and vulnerabilities of women. Similarly with the environment, a lot of people have written about places where natural resource destruction impacts women who have to perhaps go further for basic wood or water, often risking attack because they're having to go further out. Days are longer and harder. Also, the ecofeminists have written a lot and brought to our attention the common connection between abuse of nature and the abuse of women. That when women are treated as objects to be used, so also nature is treated as a resource simply to be used, and vice versa. When women are valued, nature can also be more valued. You can't separate those. All forms of slavery all are bad. All migrants are vulnerable, but the different factors call for different responses. So if we don't explicitly address women's experience, still we do tend to think about the male experience. The analysis then and the solutions end up being inadequate to at least half the population. So we've seen this, of course, with medicine, that if you only test men, it doesn't work all the same for women. The same, I want to argue, with this constellation of the global economy, climate change, and migration. These have specific effects on women that we need to be attending to. So again, then, to pull it back to our churches, We need not only to be aware of the experiences of women out there in the world, but also how are we witnessing to the full inclusion of women in our churches, if that's what we're working for in the world. We want a world where women are fully included. We need to pay more attention to how we're including that in our churches. And as most of you know, that is especially a problem for my church, the Catholic Church. And again, sometimes we just get focused on the symbolism of the priesthood, but I want to say, it's bigger than that. It's not just whether women can or can't be priests. We've got whether women are present at all levels of growth, decision-making, and community life or not. So if you have all men at a certain level, it's not surprising that women's experience will be overlooked. Another particular issue that we have to face in the United States, as recent events have made abundantly clear, is race. It's one of the original liberation themes, and as you probably all know as well or better than I do, it's one that white Christians have, across the country, still not thoroughly faced. Our churches, like our neighborhoods, are largely segregated. So again, how are we witnessing to the full inclusion if our churches and our neighborhoods are segregated? Not doing so well. There are, I think the Black Lives Matter movement has brought to at least my attention, there are patterns and depths of discrimination that go beyond what white experience quite imagined in terms of the systemic problems and the ways in which simply the division, the failure to understand each other, leads to oppression, which furthers division. We're in a tight cycle there of division, separation, and oppression feeding each other, a cycle that needs to be broken. We need to think about our democratic structures as enabling us to overcome, giving us the opportunity to overcome our selfish self-interest and work together for a greater good. We have the possibility of encountering each other in dialogue and in love, listening to the other sides instead of just demonizing. Something we might want to try to figure out. It sounds a lot better on paper, doesn't it? Yes, it's easy to talk about. It's a lot harder to do. And we have trouble getting the Democrats and Republicans in my family in the same room on Thanksgiving. But maybe that's where we should start. And as you know, our churches are also divided, often less by theological beliefs as by political beliefs these days. So what's going on if, even among Christians, we can't talk to each other about our political differences? That might be a place to start. We were talking about Francis earlier. He does say a little bit about this. He talks about dialogue out of love. Not just to persuade, to understand, but as a form of sharing yourself with another. So I would argue that we need more, not less, attention to our democratic structures. I'm going to try to sum this up maybe with an image that I've taken from Virgilio Elizondo's work. If any of you know Father Elizondo, I mentioned earlier from his work in San Fernando Cathedral, is probably one of the father of Latino theology in the United States. He has a term that he interpreted theologically out of his Mexican-American experience of mestizaje, mixing, the mixture. Chicanos, or Mexican-Americans, as he experienced growing up, were seen as a mixture rejected by both sides, as often happens. They are not considered fully American by white Americans, went back to Mexico to be rejected by their family as too American or put down. And in his own work, he returned to the Bible and discovered that Jesus came from Galilee of the Gentiles, a place of mixing, a place where the Jews were not pure Jews, in the eyes of others because they'd been adulterated by all the Gentiles crossing through, but also, of course, were too Jewish to be accepted as equals by their colonizers. And yet God chose that place of mixing to be incarnated in Jesus. So he came to love his Mexican-American mestizaje, to see it as a cultural synthesis that could take up the good of both sides and create yet another new, beautiful contribution. And he then applied that to public life in a way that I have found incredibly moving. The idea that our public life could be about a joyful coming together. He loved the term table fellowship, by the way, eating together. Coming together in our differences, not to overcome our differences, but to create even more differences out of them. Just like he said, when you bring people together of differences and then they fall in love and they create new people, or bodies coming together. So just to end with this, I think this new life, the new ideas, the new cultural synthesis that comes out of mixing, this is the mission of the church. The mission of the church is to bring together diversity into a greater harmony that creates yet another contribution that enriches the world. And I would also suggest that that kind of mestizaje, coming together, respecting differences and creating something new out of them, is what the world badly needs right now.